Welcome once again to the Stranger Than Fiction podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Meechan. I'm the author of the True Spiritual Warfare books, Nightmare in Holmes County and 225th Street, which are both available at Amazon.com as Kindle downloads, audiobooks, or paperbacks. I'd like to encourage you also, if you like the content we're producing, to please subscribe, like, and share your comments down below as well. Tonight will be part 2 of famous curses in American history, and we will be looking at the Curse of Chief Cornstalk and how that affected Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Again, this was recorded originally as part of the Kapow Radio Network in, I believe, 2012 or 2013. And it's been edited and it's being rebroadcast because all the facts remain the same. They are all still relevant, and they shine a very bright light on how curses can affect not only individuals, but entire nations and parts of nations, as we will see tonight when we get into the Curse of Chief Cornstalk. And thank you once again for tuning in. Second half of the show, one curse I would like to look at is known as the Curse of Chief Cornstalk. Chief Cornstalk was a fearless leader of the Shawnee Indians who was killed while being held captive in an American fort right next to the Ohio River in West Virginia, where the town of Point Pleasant now sits. Chief Cornstalk had gone to talk to the American soldiers because he wanted peace. He had fought them many times and had been defeated. Even in the Battle of Point Pleasant, he was defeated. And they took him hostage, basically, but he was being treated well in captivity, and some even believed that it was all a plot to get the Indians to want peace and back Cornstalk's wishes. Now, while he was in captivity, his son went to the fort to see him. They took him captive as well. Later, 2 American soldiers left the fort and went hunting and were attacked by Cornstalk's men. One of the American soldiers was murdered. The other one escaped. When he got back to the fort and told about how the other soldier was murdered, some of the soldiers, against orders, went to the stockade where Cornstalk and other men were held captive and opened fire, killing all of the Indians inside. As Cornstalk lay dying, he pronounced a curse on the white men and that land. He cursed all the land in that area. So that would mean that curse would not just be specifically Point Pleasant, but the whole surrounding area, which is where basically Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia all join right next to the Ohio River. Now, is there any evidence that Cornstalk's curse has any power behind it? Have there been any strange or inexplicable or tragic events since that time in that area? Actually, there are quite a few. On the minor scale, in 1909, there was an 86-foot tall monument that was to be erected in honor of the soldiers who fought in 1774 in the Battle of Point Pleasant when Cornstalk and his allies were defeated. Now, originally, the ceremony to dedicate this monument was set for July 22nd, 1909. But the night before the event, the clear sky overhead suddenly erupted with lightning, and lightning struck the upper part of the crane, which was used to support and put the monument into place. The machine was so badly damaged it took nearly a month to repair. Now, the ceremony was eventually held later, and the monument stood for many years. But then, on July 4th, 1921, Another bolt of lightning struck the monument, damaging the capstone and some granite blocks. Now, repairs were made to the monument, and the monument still stands today. But isn't it interesting that 2 bolts of lightning struck to stop that monument from being erected in the first place, and then later on damaged it? And the monument is in honor of the men who fought in the Battle of Point Pleasant and defeated Chief Cornstalk. Now, is that all that ever happened in that area? No, there's quite a bit more, actually. Many disasters and tragedies have happened in this area where the curse was pronounced. In 1907, the worst coal mine disaster in American history took place in Monaga, West Virginia on December 6th, when 310 miners were killed. In 1944, in June, 150 people were killed when a tornado ripped through the tri-state triangular area. And again, that's that area between Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. In 1968, a Piedmont Airlines plane crashed in August near the Kanawha Airport, killing 35 people on board. 1970, on November 14th, a Southern Airways DC-10 crashed into a mountain near Huntington, West Virginia, killing 75 people on board. In 1976, in March, the town of Point Pleasant was rocked in the middle of the night by an explosion at the Mason County Jail. Housed in the jail was a woman named Harriet Sisk, who had been arrested for the murder of her infant daughter. On March 2nd, her husband came to the jail with a suitcase full of explosives to kill himself and his wife and destroy the building. Both the Sisks were killed, along with 3 law enforcement officers. In 1978, in January, a freight train derailed at Point Pleasant and dumped thousands of gallons of toxic chemicals. The chemicals contaminated the town's water supply, and the wells had to be abandoned. Also in 1978, in April, the town of St. Mary's, which is just north of Point Pleasant, was struck with tragedy when 51 men who were working on the Willow Island power plant were killed when their construction scaffolding collapsed. There have also been multiple floods. In 1913 and 1937, Point Pleasant was almost completely destroyed by flooding. There was also a barge explosion which killed 6 men from Point Pleasant just before Christmas in 1953. A fire destroyed an entire downtown city block in the late 1880s. So there are many, many tragedies that have occurred in and around the area where the curse was pronounced. But if you know anything about the town of Point Pleasant, you know I haven't even mentioned the most interesting and controversial occurrences to ever happen at Point Pleasant. I'm speaking of Mothman. In Point Pleasant, West Virginia, for 13 months, from November 15th, 1966 to December 15th, 1967, the town and surrounding areas experienced some of the most strange and inexplicable activity ever recorded. So strange, in fact, that just as in my next book, Nightmare in Holmes County, you almost worry of information overload if you really share how strange the events were. And I'm sharing these again to point out how complex curses can be and how multifaceted the attacks of the demons associated with the curse can be. Beginning on November 15th, 1966, 2 couples, Roger and Linda Scarby and Steve and Mary Mallett, were driving near an area known as the TNT plant near Point Pleasant. Now, this was an area just outside of town where there had once been, during World War II, factories for making explosives for the war. These areas had long since been abandoned. But as these young couples were driving along, they thought they saw a man standing in the road in front of them. As they got closer, they saw that this was not a man at all. This creature standing in the road turned and faced them. It was described as being about 7 feet tall, having massive wings, but yet looking like a man, but having red glowing eyes. The couples were terrified, turned around, and started to flee. As they were driving back towards Point Pleasant, they said this creature was chasing them. They were driving at speeds in excess of 120 miles per hour, yet they could not escape this creature. When they got back to town, they went straight to the sheriff's department and reported their experience. Several deputies went with the couples back to the area where they had seen this creature. As they were arriving the TNT plant area, they again saw this creature standing on the side of the road, and it flew off into the field. At that same time, the sheriff deputies began experiencing strange interference on their police radios that they could not explain. The next day, the sheriff held a press conference and reported the couple's sightings. At that point, the press named this creature Mothman. Over the next 13 months, there would be hundreds of eyewitness accounts of Mothman. The accounts basically all described a creature approximately 7 feet tall, built like a man, but with large wings in a wingspan about 10 feet wide, and haunting red glowing eyes. Now, if that itself is not strange enough, many of the witnesses had terrible repercussions after encountering Mothman. Along with sleeplessness, nightmares, and hallucinations, many also received radiation burns on their skin. Many who looked into the eyes of Mothman also suffered from conjunctivitis, which is similar to a severe case of pink eye, where their eyes become red and swollen. In some cases, their eyes swelled shut. Many people had sunburns after encountering Mothman, even though it was in the month of December. They all suffered, for the most part, mental trauma. And many who experienced Mothman felt that their experiences were spiritual in nature and not even physical. Many thought Mothman was a demon. So what was Mothman? It turned out that on multiple occasions, witnesses saw him flying as he chased their cars in excess of 100 miles an hour. Now, these weren't your run-of-the-mill drug addict teenagers or something like that reporting these sightings. It was the good, well-known, well-respected citizens of Point Pleasant and surrounding communities. A lot of the people didn't even come forward with their first experiences because they were afraid others would think they were crazy. Witnesses also reported that Mothman flew without ever flapping his wings. He could go from standing on the ground and fly straight up in the air like what a helicopter would do without ever moving his wings. His wings may spread out, but he never flapped them. But he was witnessed by police, military officers, and citizens. At one point, 5 pilots from nearby Ohio witnessed a huge, what they described as a huge flying bird flying over 70 miles per hour without flapping its wings. Now, as if Mothman isn't crazy sounding enough, you have a whole town in uproar over sightings of this strange creature. And people were terrified. But as if that was not enough, at this same time, as the Mothman sightings started, UFO sightings began as well. It got to the point where the UFO sightings greatly outnumbered the Mothman sightings, which were in the hundreds. All through the Ohio Valley, UFOs were seen. Some were seen as strange lights, which could not be explained. Some were seen as actual spacecraft. Even reporters witnessed the UFOs. One reporter named Dave Payton, who was an experienced reporter for the Herald-Dispatch, even encountered the UFOs flying at high rates of speed in broad daylight. Often car engines would stop when the UFOs were sighted. Even across the Ohio River in Ohio, multiple witnesses saw UFOs and what they described as alien beings. Now, if you remember a show I did a few months back about UFOs, I pointed out on that show that the real documented evidence really supports that UFOs are not from another planet or another galaxy. There is a demonic component to them. But as if all these hundreds of sightings of Mothman and hundreds of sightings of UFOs are not strange enough, at that same time, strange paranormal activity began occurring in many of the homes in and around Point Pleasant, West Virginia. A well-respected and well-liked reporter named Mary Heyer began receiving reports from local citizens who trusted her of not only the UFOs, not only Mothman, but all sorts of strange paranormal activity in their homes. Doors opening and closing by themselves. Strange voices. Strange interference with their radios and televisions. And many people reported strange interferences on their telephones. Many people claimed to have poltergeist activity in their homes during this same time period. Now, a lot of the people reporting this also were church-going Christian people. They were not, drug addicts. They were not people who wanted to get attention, but they were Christian people who had no idea what they were experiencing, and they had no idea what to do about it. Along with the UFOs and Mothman and paranormal activity, the locals also began noticing strange, unfamiliar men dressed in black suits with black hats and sunglasses. These men in black drove old cars, but although the cars were models from many years before, they looked brand new. The witnesses of Mothman and the UFOs began being paid visits from these men in black, who would threaten them and tell them not to talk about Mothman and not to talk about the UFO sightings. And after threatening and warning these citizens, these men in black would seemingly disappear into thin air. Now, do you see what I mean about the multifaceted attack that demons inflict on people who are living under a curse? There's so many angles to this story of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. There's so many angles, it almost makes you feel crazy to even talk about it and even acknowledge that it is, in fact, a true story. There's a part of me, even though I've survived 2 consecutive haunted houses, that I kind of feel like, my goodness, I could look crazy talking about Mothman, talking about the UFOs and men in black. Yet these are well-documented stories, and they're true stories. They were in the newspapers at that time. They were investigated by the government. Officials from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base even went to investigate these occurrences. So they are real. And again, these activities are always in reality. If you follow them back to their real source, they are always demonic in origin. Always. For instance, if any of you have heard of Bill Bean, who is the author of a very good book called Dark Force and another very good book called Delivered, he experienced a severe haunting as a child. And even after he escaped the house where the haunting occurred, for many, many years, he witnessed UFO activity at his house, wherever he would live. He would see this stuff. It was like it followed him. At times, there would be like 50 people that would come to his house just to see the UFO shows that always seemed to happen around his house. But after he completely surrendered his life to Jesus Christ, all the UFO activity stopped. And he will tell you it was all demonic in origin. And again, as I said a few minutes ago, when you're going through this, the attacks are sometimes so multifaceted that you feel crazy. Now, these people in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, at least had the other people in the town to support them because they were all experiencing it. But imagine when you're isolated, you're in the middle of nowhere, and there's no one there but you, and you're experiencing these types of things. And if you tell, you might look crazy, but yet you can't hold it in because you can't deal with it. You can't cope with what's going on. You have to tell someone. That is part of what I experienced in what I will be sharing in my next book, Nightmare in Holmes County. And that's what I'm trying to establish. Again, what I'm going to be sharing in Nightmare in Holmes County is a multifaceted demonic attack. And again, the goal of the demons in that environment is your destruction. And that's what I will be sharing in Nightmare in Holmes County. Now, back to Point Pleasant. We're not done yet. As if this story isn't twisted and crazy enough, there's more. It's like the commercials as seen on TV. But wait, there's more. That's kind of how this story is. During the same time that Mothman and the UFOs and all this paranormal activity is happening in Point Pleasant, north of Point Pleasant, a man named Woodrow Derenberger began experiencing UFO activity, actually seeing spacecraft and being visited by alien beings. One in particular appeared to be a cross between an alien and a man in black. He was a strange-looking man who approached Woodrow and introduced himself. And his name, he said, was Indrid Cold. Indrid Cold was about 6 feet tall, with dark skin, always had a strange grin on his face, and actually talked to Woodrow Derenberger through telepathy. He explained to Woody that he actually was a different kind of being, that he was not human, and that he was from another planet. Now, I think most people's first instinct would be to assume that Woody had gone mental and that he was having some type of psychological breakdown. But the reality was, Woody Derenberger was a very well-respected individual in the community. He was a deacon in his church. Furthermore, Woody went through psychiatric evaluation and a physical, and his overall health was checked. And he was given a clean bill of health and declared to be completely sane. Furthermore, Derenberger was trusted and believed by the police and military officials. There were actually interviews on the local TV stations in West Virginia where Woody was interviewed by military officials and police on TV, on live television. Woody's wife and family also later came forward and said that they too had encountered Indrid Cold, and that Woody would claim that he went away with Indrid Cold and he would be gone for months and no one knew where he was. Now, I will tell you right now, Indrid Cold was a demon. There's no question about it. Woody Derenberger was a sane individual who was having these encounters with this being. And as I said before, these demons' whole purpose is to destroy those they come in contact with. And because of Woody's experiences and Woody being interviewed on TV and all these different things, he could not keep a job. His employers would fire him just because they would accuse him of being crazy. So he couldn't keep a job. He lost his marriage. His wife divorced him. And he basically lost everything. He later tried to write a book about his experiences, but his manuscripts would disappear from in his house. Basically, whatever it was going to take to literally drive Woody crazy is what was happening. And it cost him everything. Now, this isn't the end of the story for Point Pleasant, West Virginia either. As I stated earlier, all of this strange activity continued for 13 months. But the final event was the most tragic. On December 15th, 1967, exactly 13 months to the day from when it all began, the large suspension bridge that crossed the Ohio River connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Ohio collapsed with 37 cars on it. 46 people were killed. It was later determined that one pin in an eye-bar broke and caused the entire bridge to collapse. And 1/8 inch of rust on one eye-bar caused that pin to snap. After the bridge collapsed and this terrible tragedy happened, all of the Mothman, UFO, Men in Black, and paranormal activity in and around Point Pleasant stopped. Some witnesses claimed that they saw Mothman on the bridge before it collapsed. Others claimed that they saw Men in Black working on the bridge before it collapsed. Either way, what we know for sure is 46 people died. Hundreds of people witnessed UFOs and Mothman, Men in Black, paranormal activity in and around Point Pleasant, West Virginia for 13 months between November 15th, 1966 and December 15th, 1967. What we know for sure is that is the very area that Chief Cornstalk cursed hundreds of years earlier. So it's hard to look at these situations where there's documented curses, especially from the American Indians, where curses were pronounced and then terrible tragedies happened over and over and over, and to still deny that curses are not real. Curses are very real. They're mentioned in the Bible. They are very real. But we have authority if we're born-again Christians. We have authority over them. But we got to break them. And we got to deal with the curse itself and then get rid of the demons associated with it. But we have the authority in Jesus' name. That's what the church needs to be doing. 1/3 of Jesus' ministry was casting out demons. Right before he went back to heaven, in Mark 16:17, he again mentions that those who believe in him and are baptized will cast out demons. So these are true believers. People who get saved and are obedient to him will cast out demons. It's mentioned throughout the New Testament, yet it's scoffed at today in the church. How many more tragedies need to happen before people wake up? It's sad that a deacon in his church suffered so greatly. Woodrow Derenberger lost everything because of his encounters with demon spirits linked to a curse. that was pronounced on the area where he lived many, many years before he was ever born. And what I want to share, these stories are a little bit unsettling, to be honest. But what I'm going to tell you is, again, in Nightmare in Holmes County, I'm going to document my experiences with these same types of curses. What it cost me. What I suffered when I came in contact with demon spirits linked to very old curses and modern curses. And also how I was victorious over that in the name of Jesus, through God's mercy and grace and the faithfulness of other believers who came alongside me and helped me fight. And in sharing that, I want to tell you, if you're going through something like that, if you're having these kinds of experiences, you can have deliverance. You can have that activity and those hauntings and all that terror. It can be stopped. And you can have a new life. And that's what Jesus did. He came to set the captives free. He came to not only pay for our salvation, but also to give us deliverance from the enemy. That's what the church is supposed to be doing. So that concludes the second part of Famous American Curses, in which we focused on, in the second half, we focused on Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and the Curse of Chief Cornstalk. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, like, and share. If you want to support the podcast, you can also go to Amazon.com and get either paperback, Kindle, or audiobook versions of Nightmare in Holmes County and 225th Street as well. Again, thank you for tuning into the program tonight. Until next time, good night and God bless.